I've been quite busy working on the X2 and I haven't had a whole lot of time to film, so I did a bunch of things off camera. In this video I'm going to go over a few of the things that I've done and focus specifically on the trim lever modification that I made. Works extremely well. It's probably the best one that I've ever seen done. It uses very, very few parts, and just about anybody with some fairly simple tools can do it. So let's get into it. I got some waterproof connectors off of Amazon, and I completely rewired the coils. There was some cracks in the insulation, so I rewired all of that. I labeled them underneath here. I have a heat shrink labeling machine. I made a bracket for the relay and mounted it here because the bracket was damaged on the side of the body here. In one of my videos I mentioned that I am making a support for here. That's to strengthen the chassis a little bit so cracks like this don't happen. But also it's going to give me a place to mount some stuff. I'll be able to run the cooling lines along it. I will be able to run the fuel lines, and it'll also look pretty cool. And it will give me a place to mount my relay as well. I purchased a new relay and put it inside of the relay box, and I wired it up with some waterproof connectors as well. I got the battery in. This is a larger battery than normal just because I'm a weirdo and I want to have lots of battery capacity. I got the cooling lines all installed. I got the fuel lines temporarily installed. I can ride it this way if I want, but yeah, they look a little bit goofy. I installed this lanyard setup. It's quite easy. It just goes, one wire goes to ground, and you simply ground the blue wire to the stop relay, and that shuts the engine down. So what I'm going to do now is explain to you guys how I modified the trim setup on this X2. And one of the problems that people run into is that it doesn't have enough throw or cable pull. So let's see if we can measure the amount of cable pull that the throttle has compared to the trim lever. So it's none there, and now we can measure the amount of cable pull as 1.69 inches. And then on the trim lever, we'll be generous and call it 0.84. So the issue that you're going to run into is that no matter what modifications you do to your nozzle, you're not going to get it to go up all the way because your cable won't move enough. People actually sell kits for this, and I've seen a whole bunch of different ways that this has been done. But this is the best setup that I've ever seen, and it uses very, very few extra pieces, except for the obvious ones that you need, like a brake lever and cable. So now I'm going to show you guys what I did, how I got around some problems, and how I made it work nice and smooth and fairly clean install, and how it used almost no extra pieces. I've tried recording this video several times now, and I keep getting caught up because I remember something that I forgot to say, or I get confused about how it was originally. So instead of going through that confusion, I'm simply going to start at the very top. We're going to follow the system all the way through, and I'm going to try to explain it to you guys as best as possible while explaining kind of how it was from the factory, and as many things as I can remember along the way that I did. Starting at the top, I have the Odyssey module lever. You can use different levers, but this one is unique in a few ways and built very robust. So yeah, that's why I chose to use it. That, and because I already had one from my 2002 or 2003 BMX. So this was a front brake lever that I had never used from way back then. So I decided to use it. We have an ordinary BMX brake cable or mountain bike brake cable. So it comes down, loops around, and the first kind of weird part that I have in this system is what they call a roll-em-a-jig. And I'm not making that up. This is actually the name of it. It is basically a pulley so that the cable can go around a 90-degree bend, very smooth. The roll-em-a-jig that I have is actually a very old one, and it's made out of aluminum. I believe they're about $14 and they're made out of plastic. They are quite good. The reason why I use this one is because I had it. If you want to go with a cheaper route and you don't want something as complicated as a roll-em-a-jig, then you can use a mountain bike brake noodle. Next up, I removed the bolt that goes down through here. There's 3 bolts that hold the plate on underneath. You can see there is one remaining here. I took that bolt out and used the longer one, and then I drilled a hole through it so that the cable could pass through. So the cable goes through the roll-em-a-jig and then through this bolt, which acts as a cable stop. I used a bit of a fancy bolt, but you don't need anything fancy at all. You could use a piece of ready rod as long as you have a nut that you can thread down to tighten it up, basically so that it doesn't rotate, and also so that it acts as a bolt where you used to have a bolt. The cable then passes through, and the next piece that you need is this Odyssey NERP. It goes on with a 10mm wrench on the backside and a 3.5mm Allen key out here. I use some stainless steel washers, and basically what this is for is when you let go of the lever, you don't want the nozzle to go from up to down. You want the lever to go from up to level. And what this is, the diameter of these washers actually control where the nozzle stops. So these washers are acting as a stop, and the bigger this washer is, the more the nozzle will keep pointing up. The smaller the washers are, the more it will point down. So I can actually change the stop point by changing the size of these washers. The bolt that holds these washers in place is threaded into the detent ball hole. So I used a stainless steel bolt that I got from somewhere on this jet ski, and I threaded out. There are 2 holes that are used for detent balls, one here and one here. And I threaded this out to 8 by 1.25, which is what most of the 8mm bolts on this jet ski are. But this arm used to mount on the other side of it with a ball joint in this hole. So this hole used to be threaded for the 6mm ball joint. I drilled that out so that the NERP fits in it. And basically the whole trim mechanism, I took it apart and flipped it around. So the part that used to have the knob on it is now on the back side. So if we go around here and we look through that hole, you can see the trim. You can see the trim knob actually used to mount on this plate. So the detent balls used to engage on the other side of this plate. I'll try to get you guys a view of that in a second. I used one of those detent holes as a center punch mark and drilled out one of those and threaded it so that the 6mm ball joint threads into that. Okay, so we're looking at it from the other side now, and in the background on the top right of the screen you can see there are 4 detent holes. And on the opposite side of the plate, which you guys can't see, there are 4 more. Oh, there you can see them perfect there. So there are 4 detent holes, and I drilled out the one that is furthest to the left and threaded it for the 6mm ball joint that used to go in this arm. And all of this junk and the little aluminum bracket that went on here, I took that off, and that is now in my scrap parts bin. I know that might be a little bit confusing, but basically all of the parts in here, except for the NERP and the cable, came off of the original setup. I also had to cut away a chunk of aluminum from the top here, and that is so that the NARP can actually rotate around without hitting. As you can see, that NARP passes right by where I cut this material off. So I just used a hacksaw and sliced down and across and took out a chunk there. And I also cut out a couple of slivers from in here. I'm not sure if I can get at it with the camera, but I cut a couple slivers off so that this plate would fit in. If you don't cut it, you'll notice that you can't actually get this in. And when you tighten the nut up, it'll just bind up. You won't be able to actually make it rotate. As far as mounting it here and having a straight shot, that's the way you get the most leverage or the most efficiency out of the pull. So you want a nice straight shot. The cable should be almost 90 degrees to the pivot point when it's under a lot of load. So you can see I could be going actually a little bit further there. This is what I did to accommodate for using a BMX lever with not a lot of throw. I used the shorter arm that the ball joint normally attaches to as the pulling arm. So the arm that connects to the cable is a little bit shorter than people usually make it. And then by drilling into the detent hole, that is very close to the outside of the original disc or plate, whatever you want to call that. And so that gives me a little over a 1-to-1 ratio. So I'm getting like a 1.2 or something like that ratio. So for example, if I get an inch of throw here when I grab this, I'm getting 1.2 inches on throw on the actual cable. So you could leave this like this and it would work perfectly fine on the water, but it does feel a little bit weird when you're sitting on dry land. So what I did is I added a spring, and I see a lot of guys, they add the spring in up here. They kind of have a weird goofy setup where they have a bracket or there's all sorts of different ways to do this. What I came up with is extremely simple, and it makes it extremely smooth and doesn't make it crowded or messy up here. Not sure if you guys will be able to see this at all, but what I did was mounted a little L bracket on the front of the pump nozzle. So the lower left hand pump nozzle bolt is holding an L bracket that I have a spring attached to. And that comes back and attaches to the ball joint for the trim setup. So maybe you guys can see where the spring hooks around. I'm not sure if the camera can pick that up or not. But what that does is it spring loads the nozzle so that it wants to come down. And that's why I have the stop. This would go all the way down, but because I have this stop with the stainless steel washers here, it is limited to how far it goes down. Well, that's just about it for the trim lever modification. It's almost done. I'm still going to put a plastic cap of sorts on here, but before I do that, I want to take it out and actually test it on the water. I'm sure that I'm going to have to make some minor adjustments or changes to it. The one thing that I am worried about is that I won't have enough strength in my hand to hold it while I'm accelerating hard. As the water pumps through the nozzle, it's going to put some feedback pressure, and I'm not really sure how much. So maybe this ultimately won't work, but I'm fairly confident that it will. Anyway, I hope I didn't confuse everybody too much. If you have any questions about this, leave them in the comment section below. And if you want to tell me that I'm a big dumb goof and that this is never going to work, I'd be happy to hear about that as well. If you've tried something like this yourself or you have a better idea, I'd be interested in knowing what you've come up with. Anyway, that's going to do it for this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.